Quite recently, I've been in the mood for super stupid comedies. I'm talking the kind of movies where you have to knock a couple of digits off your IQ to really truly appreciate them. But it's not just as simple as pulling up Full Moon's streaming catalogue and selecting one of the evil Bong films and letting the stupid take you. True stupidity in cinema is really an art, a craft. Surprisingly, it takes some wit and intelligence to write genuinely entertaining stupid movies. If a stupid person writes a stupid movie, you can always tell because it's hot garbage that no one would touch with a barge pole. Because it's unbearably irritating. See Robot in the Family. But every so often, a clever stupid person makes a clever stupid movie. And while like any genre, it's a sliding scale of quality, with Airport and the Naked Gun movies at one end sliding right the way down to the aforementioned anal squirts of Full Moon and Troma, when you land on one that's quite well made and you're in the mood, it's a wonderfully satisfying experience. That's why today's movie, 1987's Deathrow Gameshow, was such a surprise and delight to sit through. It sits just on the right side of stupid, manic and hyperactive enough to keep a decent pace, stupid and crazy enough to be genuinely entertaining. I picked this one up a couple of years ago based on the plot, but the cover of the release I bought kinda put me off it. But I was so wrong to judge a book by its cover here, and I regret not watching this movie sooner as I genuinely had a ball with it. The film is set in the not too distant future and follows game show host come second place Dale Cooper lookalike Chuck Todan. Chuck is the host of the cable TV show Live or Die, a controversial show in which death row inmates are given a final chance to win their freedom or die trying. Literally. With contestants being set seemingly simple challenges with horrific consequences if they fail. Chuck himself seems to be a bit of a mixed character. On the one hand, he seems to be relatively chilled out about his role in what is effectively corporate murder for profit, but at the same time he does have a much less chilled, much more prominent assholey streak that runs through him that seems to get exacerbated by the show's viewers and critics. His fans are desperate to get in with him, and they think by cozying up to Chuck he'll be able to get their partners, family members or friends on the show to give them a chance of freedom. And as such, Chuck is happy to go with the flow, taking advantage of these poor helpless people. He sleeps with groupies and has only contempt for any attempts at toadying. Equally, his critics think he's a paid murderer and frequently picket the show, leading Chuck to become jaded and one note towards almost anyone he comes into contact with. He definitely has a bit of a superiority complex going on, but his assholism seems to become more or less pronounced depending on how the script wants him to be when dealing with people. Anyway, life's pretty fine for Chuck. He has a big house, the aforementioned groupies, and he's a prime-time success, being both famous and infamous. However, there's a tiny problem. About 6 months ago, a mafia boss was put on the show and was set the simple task of not getting a boner while a stripper strips around him. And he passed it. But Chuck accidentally nudged the mafia boss, activating a pressure sensor and turning on the electric chair that the mob boss was sat in, killing him instantly. Since the mafia have wanted Chuck's head and they aren't taking "it was an accident" as a credible answer, Chuck's invited on a panel show where he's introduced to Gloria Sternvirgin, a strong critic of Live or Die and someone who thinks Chuck's an out-and-out pig. They duke it out on the panel show, and after the recording, Gloria corners Chuck in the car park to give him a piece of her mind. This is cut short, however, when the mafia turn up and try to kill Chuck. Chuck pulls Gloria into the car and the pair speed off, all the while trying to shake off the gangsters who've literally clung to the side of Chuck's car. Later that night, Chuck has a weird nightmare involving the now dead mafia boss and Gloria, and in the morning when Chuck turns up to work, Gloria isn't far behind, this time brandishing a letter written in what looks like blood exclaiming that, as she's now Chuck's girlfriend, she's as likely to get whacked as Chuck is. During this exchange, Chuck gets a call from the new leader of the mafia, Luigi Pappalardo. He initially tells Chuck that him and his girlfriend are going to get whacked, but Chuck's smooth talking opens up the opportunity for him and Luigi to talk turkey. Luigi comes down to the studio and brings his elderly mother along to see the sights and sounds of a genuine TV company. It's around this point that we realise that Luigi is a great big cannoli head. He's a real chowder brain. He's not playing with a full deck. He's an idiot. But he agrees to spare Chuck in exchange for 2 tickets to the recording of another show that runs on the network, and Chuck's solemn word that no more of Luigi's men will ever be killed on Live or Die again. Chuck tries to tell Luigi that he doesn't book the guests, but Luigi basically reiterates his point, at which point Chuck realises he's late for a taping of tonight's edition of Live or Die, and quickly heads off. Unbeknownst to him, however, Luigi's mother, who wandered off to the bathroom while dressed as a convict, is picked up by one of the staff for Live or Die, who mistake her as a contestant on the show. Luigi, meanwhile, takes a real shine to Gloria and basically forces her into a dinner date at gunpoint. What follows is a whirlwind run of slapstick insanity and stupidity as Chuck unknowingly puts Mrs. Popolado through the Live or Die ringer, and Gloria has the dinner date from hell. And when Chuck finally does realise who he's just had on the show, well, you better believe that final 30 minutes of this film are the rootinest, tootinest, craziest goddamn 30 minutes of cinema available on Blu-ray. At first, I mistakenly thought that I was getting into a movie that was going to be very similar to Shock Treatment crossed with a little bit of The Running Man. And while there are definitely some elements present that would reaffirm that feeling, I'd say this film's probably closer in tone to UHF, if UHF cross-pollinated with Brass Eye. There's some very dark humour in this. It's fundamentally slapstick, but there's just this constant low-bubbling undercurrent of macabre and dark humour that really helped offset the absolute stupidity. And that's one of the nice things about this film. While it does dance the line of being insufferably stupid at times, it's prevented from going completely overboard by that darker, wittier tone combined with a few actually quite more emotional ticks. They work in tandem to just keep dragging this film back to a semblance of reality that stops it devolving into a hot mess. Which came as a terrific relief for me once I realised that this was the quality of the writing I was getting into. The script in terms of structuring is a bit of a mixed bag. The first 2 acts are as traditional as it's possible to get. It follows the typical plot beats that comedy movies like this should do to a T. And in these acts, I have to admit I quite like the blatant and in-your-face messaging this film puts out about how prisoners are seen as disposable to society. A lot of movies will do this in a subtle, veiled way, but this movie goes out of its way to make the prisoners on death row out to be the most hopeless, stupid and useless people in the world. They're almost below rats in terms of how useful they are to society at large in this universe. In fact, they use prisoners in adverts to test rat poison and blenders, and it's so in your face about how forgotten and abused prisoners are in society that I thought it actually came across as a quite neat little contrast to how the themes typically play out. The third act is really quite flyaway by contrast, preferring to settle into a manic farce format that genuinely had me wondering how exactly they were going to end this thing. Admittedly, they do choose to end it in such a way that I personally found to be a little bit safe, but I suppose it's better to stick the landing than risk it all on something that may not have been so sturdy. The comedy is definitely subjective. I tend to like over-the-top slapstick-heavy movies like Airplane, UHF or the Naked Gun films, and while this definitely wasn't in their league, I still thought it was a light and airy effort that was packed with gallows humour and one-liners. I laughed quite a bit throughout this movie, which I generally see as a sign that the film's doing its job. There's a lot of decent puns and quick, quippy jokes that land quite effectively. I think there were only a couple of instances where I groaned. It's just a fun little experience to sit through this one. The dialogue isn't the sharpest in the world, but in this kind of movie, the general dialogue kind of plays second fiddle to the gags. So while I'd say that the dialogue and plot aren't necessarily the most consistent thing in the world, they were okay enough that the jokes alone carried this thing through any turbulence. What I will say is that there are a couple of gags here which, to the more PC-minded, probably wouldn't go down too well. I recalled at least a couple of rape jokes, a few stereotypical accents, and some very mild homophobia. But, given that this film was made in 1987, there's surprisingly few instances of it, and equally given that most movies from around this time would make it a staple part of the movie to have a funny gay or racist stereotype in there, this movie gets away largely unscathed. Not that that excuses any of its prominence, but I guess what I'm saying is those elements are there, which is a shame, but they could be worse compared to movies that were coming out at the time. There's also a very weird semi-overtly sexual tone that runs through this one that kept catching me off guard. What I mean by that is that there's 3 or 4 moments in this film where just out of left field, boobs will suddenly turn up. Or in one of the weirder moments of this film, there's a running gag where Chuck's secretary is repeatedly using a vibrator and has to quickly hide it away as Chuck bursts into the room. It's very tonally out of place, and I can only assume it's trailer fodder or something to help suddenly jolt the audience back into the room. But yeah, those weird moments weren't essential and could have very easily been cut out. They just felt weird. This movie was written and directed by Mark Pirro, with some additional script elements contributed by Alan Grease. Mark has 15 writing and directing credits, and everything he's ever directed he's also written. And let me just say, some of his titles look brilliant. Like, going through his IMDb, I think I'd quite happily sit through and watch about 90% of his movies. With titles such as Nudist Colony of the Dead, Curse of the Queer Wolf, and The Deceased Won't Desist. If they were half as fun as this movie was, I'm sure I'd be in for a good time. Alan only has 4 writing credits, pretty much all of them movies that Mark made, so I'm led to believe that they're regular collaborators. The direction's a bit all over the place, honestly, but that's kind of the nature of this film. There's 3 levels to work with, really. The real-life events, which are shot pretty much in the style of many late 80s comedy movies of the time. It's a bit generic, honestly, but then you have the studio sequences, which pet things up a bit because they're shot like actual 80s TV game shows, and they look and feel glossy and overly bouncy, which is a nice change of pace. And finally, there are a couple of moments where things go a bit abstract and dreamy. And in those instances, they not only go into the experimental and colourful sort of territory, but they also take slightly cheap but nonetheless funny pot shots at experimental and art house theatre. It feels like a manic production when all of these are woven together with so much going on, but there was never a moment where I felt like they really dropped the ball. It feels like a professional production pretty much all the way through. Same goes for the Cine really in that regard. In the game show segments, they follow the conventions of shooting a game show. Everything's silky smooth and polished within an inch of its life. The real life segments probably could have been a bit more involved, maybe a few more cuts to different styles of shots to help keep momentum, but it's more than serviceable. I'd say on the whole they follow the conventions well. And for what it is, I'd say I was almost impressed by just how well this has all turned out. But there is room for improvement. That being said, this was also Mark's first time shooting on 35mm film, so I imagine that there was some teething issues, as is the case whenever anybody starts working with a new format. Performance-wise, well, where do I even begin? John McCafferty is a proto-Dale Cooper for a good chunk of this movie. He even looks a little bit like Kyle MacLachlan in this. His constant attempts to be upbeat, coupled with a wobbly but ever-present confidence, even when pleading for his life, just had me smiling and laughing for pretty much the entire movie. He gets some semi-serious moments as well, which for a slapstick comedy is a bit unusual, but tonally it works quite well, I found. He really is the star of the show in this. Robin Blythe is also superb as Gloria Sternbergen, at first playing a slightly conservative, uptight lady about town, before slowly softening a bit as she comes into Chuck's crazy world. She's a genuinely funny performer who probably took more than a couple of my biggest laughs in this. She's able to play the straight guy, but when things really begin to fall into insanity, she's also able to change gear and roll with the punches quite spectacularly too. I was genuinely really impressed. The rest of the cast are more or less fine as well. There were no standout stinkers from what I saw. I would say Bino, that's literally his name, who plays Luigi, plays his role with maybe just a tad too much stupid in his tone of delivery. I think that's how he was told to play it, but it's maybe just a bit too exaggerated for my taste at times. Equally, Darwin Carson does a more than fine job playing Chuck's secretary Trudy, but there are occasions where she's a little bit too ditzy. Again, I'm fairly sure she was told to play it that way, but the overperformance, like Beano's Luigi, sometimes pulls me out of the film for just how over-exaggerated it is. Finally, the soundtrack. It's alright. But it's not great. It's of quality, I can't fault that. It's 80s synthy gubbins for the most part, but it doesn't sound thin or tinny like most productions from this time do. I mean, it sounds like it has some production behind it, but it's just so not memorable. The theme tune's kind of memorable. I'm certain I have a line or two of it rattling around in my head somewhere, but the incidental music, it's unfortunately one of those moments where I couldn't hum you a bar even before the credits had finished. It's just super generic for the late 80s, slightly synth poppy, occasionally synth rocky middle ground music. Unremarkable is the word I'd use to describe it. It probably could have been better, but it definitely could have been worse. Deathrow Gameshow was released on VHS in 1987 by Castle Home Video. From what I can research, I know it definitely had an ex-rental release, but I can't confirm if it had a retail release. I would err on the side of caution and say that it didn't. It then skipped a DVD release in the UK before getting a dual format region-free release in 2016 by Vinegar Syndrome. And, as always, they've done a cracking job. With some brilliant picture quality, a nice set of extras including a commentary with the director and cast, a set of Mark's short films leading up to this film's release, and a recent director's cut of the film, which I really need to check out as I bet most of the nudity and non-PC content will be removed, because it's weird being in this film. I reckon this is probably about as comprehensive and as good a release that this movie is ever going to get. And it looks pretty damn good. Deathrow Gameshow is an acquired taste, but I really had a hoot with it. It's silly, stupid, goofy fun that, while only clocking in at about an hour and 20 minutes, didn't feel like it overstayed its welcome at all. It felt quite densely packed with material, if I'm being honest, which, for a fast-paced slapstick comedy, is always a good sign, especially if they're onto a winner with the hit rate. While I don't think it would be for everyone, I'd say if you do like movies like UHF or you have an affinity for the sillier works of Chris Morris or Armando Iannucci, I'd say give this one a go.